Assalamualaikum. I am Nurul Adila binti Ibrahim, matric number 301356. We are from Group 10 and we will be talking about Chapter 14, which is the aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So, as we know, there are two aggregate supply, which is the short run aggregate supply and long run aggregate supply. And now I will be talking about the short run aggregate supply. So what does it mean by short run aggregate supply? It means the total supply of all goods and services produced within an economy at a given price level at a certain period. The curve is upward sloping, showing a direct relationship between the price level and the quantity supply of real GDP. Short run aggregate supply might look a lot like a supply curve in a product market, but some key differences make short run aggregate supply different than supply. In the market model, supply slope up because of the profit motive of individual firm. If a firm gets a higher price, they will make a higher profit by selling more. So quantity supply increases when price increases. On the other hand, the short run aggregate supply slope up for two reasons, which is the sticky input prices like wages and sticky output prices, also called as menu cost. So sticky prices refers to pricing that is resistant to changing market condition. Meanwhile, menu cost refers to the cost incurred by a firm when it changes its price. So, how does short-run aggregate supply respond to higher demand? To meet higher demand, companies focus on getting the most out of their existing resources. The first one is companies will increase labor hour, which require the employee to work overtime or hire temporary workers to boost production. The second one is enhancing efficiency. By optimizing existing processes and technology, firms can increase output with the additional capital investment. And the third one is utilizing inventory. Company may draw down existing inventory to meet immediate demand. This adjustment allows companies to increase supply quickly and respond to demand changes. However, these measures have limits since extended overtime can lead to worker fatigue, which can result in inefficiency over time. In summary, the short-run aggregate supply curve is more elastic because firms can respond to price changes by maximizing the use of their current input, even though the capacity for expansion through new investment is constrained.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nur Akila binti Hazal Hafiz and my matrix numbers is 300810. So today I will explain about the shift in the short run aggregate supply curve. So there is two important things that we should know in this topic, which is leftward shift and rightward shift. First is leftward shift. What is leftward shift? The curve shifts to the left because of increasing cost. So by this, it indicates a decrease in the quantity of goods and service supplies at any given price level. Second is rightward shift. What is rightward shift? So the graph shows that the curve is shift to the right because there are decrease in the price, or we call cost. So by this, it indicates an increase in the quantity of goods and service supply at any given price level. Next, let's see factors the aggregate supply curve shift. There is four factors, which is 1. Cost of production, 2nd is economic performance, 3. Government policies, and lastly, environment. So first factor is cost of production. So there is two things, which is lower cost and higher cost. Example for this cost is wages rate and input prices. So when this cost is decrease, the curve will shift to the right, while if the cost is increasing, the curve will shift to the left right. Second is economic performance. So when there are increasing in the labor, capital, technology advance, the curve will shift to the right, while if the economies stay the same, the curve will shift to the left. Next is government policies. So in these government policies, when happens supply side policies and the regulation, the curve will shift to the right, while if the happens wages and efficiency and over-regulation, the curve will shift to the left. And lastly is environment, is the factor that the aggregate supply curve shift. So in this environment, there's a two thing, which is good environment and bad environment. In this good environment, as example, is a good weather. When happen this, the graph will make the curve shift to the right. And for the bad environment such as bad weather, natural disaster, this will make the curve shift to the left.
I will continue our discussion today by diving into section which compares the aggregate supply curve under classical and Keynesian economics. Let's start by taking a closer look at the short-run supply curve. The AS curve can be categorized into two main perspectives, which is classical and Keynesian. As you can see, the shape of these curves are quite different. So in the classical model, the AS curve is vertical. On the other hand, the Keynesian AS curve is more complex and can be divided into three distinct ranges. First, we have horizontal range. Second, we have intermediate range. And third, we have vertical range. So let's dive deeper into it. Let's take a look at the shape of AS curve. For classical, the curve is vertical at natural level of output, also known as potential output or full employment output. This vertical shape indicates that the total output of an economy in the short run is independent of the price level. Changes in the aggregate price level do not affect the quantity of goods and services produced. Keynesian model, on the other hand, includes three distinct ranges. The first one is horizontal range, or can be called as Keynesian range. At low levels of output, the short-run aggregate supply curve is horizontal, which represents period of high employment where increases in demand do not lead to higher price. This occurs because there are idle resource and underutilized capacity. The second one is intermediate range, or also known as upward sloping. This happens when output increases and the economy approach full employment. This indicates that increases in aggregate demand begins to cause both higher output and higher prices due to scarce resource. The third one, vertical range, which also known as classical range. At full employment, the short-run aggregate supply curve becomes vertical, which also similar to the classical view. Now let's move to the next one, which is price and wage flexibility. Price and wage flexibility in classical model is fully flexible. This flexibility ensures that markets clear, meaning any surplus or shortage in the market is quickly resolved through adjustment in price and wages. Keynesian, on the other hand, has sticky price and wages flexibility. Keynesian economists traditionally argues that price and wages are sticky, meaning they do not adjust quickly to changes in economic conditions. This stickiness can lead to prolonged period of unemployment or inflation. In classical model, output is determined by factors of production, which is fundamentally different from Keynesian economics, relying on the notion of markets are self-correcting. The equilibrium level of output is determined by factors such as technology, resources, and preferences rather than aggregate demand. The classical model assumes that flexible prices and wages, ensuring that any deviations from full employment are temporary as the economy adjusts to shocks. Meanwhile, in the Keynesian economics, the determination of output in the short run is primarily driven by aggregate demand, where output determination is based on the equilibrium between aggregate demand and aggregate supply, particularly in short run where prices and wages are sticky. The next aspect is employment. Classical economic theory posits that the economy naturally gravitates towards full employment due to self-regulating market forces. According to this view, any deviations from full employment are temporary. Market mechanisms such as flexible wages and prices automatically adjust to restore equilibrium. For instance, if employment rises, wages will fall, making it cheaper for business to hire more workers, thereby increasing employment levels. On the other hand, Keynesian's economic theory challenges the classical notion by indicates that the economy does not always or quickly return to full employment on its own. According to Keynesians, various factors can cause prolonged periods of unemployment and underutilization of resources. Keynesians believe that aggregate demand and total spending in the economy plays a crucial role in determining the overall level of economic activity and employment. During periods of low demand, business reduce production and lay off workers, leading to higher unemployment. Classical economists such as Adam Smith and David Ricardo believe in the efficiency of free markets. They argued that markets have a self-regulating mechanism where prices, wages, and interest rates adjust naturally to balance supply and demand. Classical economists advocate for minimal government intervention. They argued that government interference in markets can lead to inefficiencies. On the other hand, Keynesian economics developed by John Maynard Keynes during the Great Depression challenges the classical view. Keynesians argue that markets do not always self-adjust quickly, particularly in times of economic downturns or recession. Keynesians advocate for active fiscal policy where government adjusts its spending and taxation policies to stabilize the economy. Unlike classical economists who believe in the natural tendency of the economy to reach full employment, Keynesians argue that government intervention is of the long-run aggregate supply curve is vertical in the classical and Keynesian analysis. The first one is classical economists. Classical economists argue that long-run aggregate supply curve is vertical, reflecting the belief that in the long run, the economy naturally gravitates towards full employment. Output is determined by the economy's productive capacity, such as labor, capital, and technology, and not by the price level. Classical theory asserts that any deviations from full employment are temporary. This is because wages and prices are flexible, adjusting swiftly to restore equilibrium at full employment. Now let's take a look at the Keynesian perspective. Keynesian economists acknowledge that the long-run aggregate supply curve is vertical in the very long run when the economy reaches full employment. However, they argue that in the short term to medium term, the long-run aggregate supply curve can be upward sloping. This divergence is due to factors such as wage and price stickiness, market imperfections, and insufficient aggregate demand. Keynesians emphasize that in these circumstances, the economy may operate below its full potential output, and it is important to note that the Keynesian aggregate supply curves become vertical only as the economy approaches full employment in the long run. In conclusion, while both classical and Keynesian economists agree that the long-run aggregate supply curve is vertical in the long run, indicating full employment, they differ in their views of how the economy behaves in the short to medium run. This classical view maintains that the economy is always or quickly returns to full employment, whereas the Keynesian views always for prolonged periods of unemployment and output below its potential due to rigidities and insufficient demand.
Next, I'm going to continue to present part 14.3 Microeconomics Equilibrium and Policy Change. There are two types, which is short-run and long-run equilibrium. Short-run equilibrium means when the level aggregate output demanded equals to the level of aggregate supplied. In a short-run equilibrium, real GDP can be greater or less than the potential GDP. Long-run equilibrium means that when real GDP equals to the potential GDP. From the graph, we can see that long-run equilibrium will occur at the intersection of the aggregate demand and long aggregate supply curve. Firstly, the economy is at below full employment. It happens when its short-run GDP lower than long-run potential GDP. Means that some labor, capital, or other resources are unemployed. From the graph, in the long run, money wage will fall until the short aggregate supply curve pass through the equilibrium point. Secondly, the economy is at above full employment equilibrium. It is a situation where an economic gross domestic product, which is GDP, higher than expected. From the long run graph, money wage rises until the short aggregate supply curve pass through the equilibrium point. Next is economic growth and inflation in the aggregate supply aggregate demand model. First, economic growth occurs when the quantity of labor growth, capital accumulated and technology more advanced, and also potential GDP will increase. This will result the long aggregate supply curve shift rightward. Secondly is inflation. Inflation happen if the quantity money grows faster than potential GDP and aggregate demand increases more than the aggregate supply. This will result the aggregate demand curve shift rightward and more faster than long aggregate supply curve to shift rightward. Next is business cycle in the aggregate supply aggregate demand model. Business cycle occurs because aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply fluctuate, while money wage does not change rapidly to keep real GDP at the potential GDP. There are three types of business cycle. First is above full employment equilibrium that occurs when the real GDP exceeds potential GDP. It also known as inflationary gap. Second is full employment equilibrium that occurs when real GDP equals the potential GDP. Third is below full employment equilibrium that occurs when potential GDP exceeds the real GDP. It also known as recessionary gap. These are the figures B and D that illustrates full employment equilibrium, and there is an inflationary gap that shown that the amount by the potential GDP exceeds the real GDP, while figures C and D illustrates below full employment equilibrium, and there is a recessionary gap, which the amount by the real GDP is less than the potential GDP. As you can see in the figures D, it shows that the economy move from one short-run equilibrium to others, real GDP will fluctuate around potential GDP in the business cycle. Next is changes in aggregate demand. From the figures A, which is short-run effect, it shows that the effects of an increase of aggregate demand will shift the aggregate demand curve rightward. It means that the firm increase the production and price level also increases. Plus, in figures B, it shows that the long run effect. There is an inflationary gap at the short run equilibrium. Money wage rate started to rise and the short aggregate supply curve start to shift leftward. It will result the price level continues to increase and real GDP will continue to decrease until it equal to the potential GDP. Next is changes in aggregate supply. The figure shows that the effect of a rise in the price of oil. It shows that the short aggregate supply curve shift leftward. That will cause the real GDP to decrease and price level increases. Thus, the economy will experience the stagflation. Next, I will pass to the next presenter to explain about the fiscal policy.
Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Zainal Amri bin Shakaria. My metric number is 301266. Now I'm going to explain about fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is a key tool used by a government to influence the economy and achieve macroeconomic equilibrium. It involves the use of government spending and taxation to impact aggregate demand, which is turn affect overall economic activity, employment, inflation, and growth. It is also will influence other variable and income in the product market and money market. Next, we're gonna go to the primary objective of fiscal policy. The first one is economic growth, stimulating economic activity to increase the output of goods and services. The second one is full employment, reducing unemployment by increasing demand for labor. Next, price stability, controlling inflation by managing aggregate demand. And the last one is equitable distribution of income, using taxation and spending to reduce income inequality. Okay, now I'm going to explain about the fiscal policy tools. For fiscal policy tools divided by two, which is the first one is expansionary and the second one is contractionary. So for the first one, expansionary is used during period of recession or economic downturn. It involves increasing government spending and decreasing taxes to stimulate aggregate demand. So it means that by the government spending increase, but the taxes is decreased, and it will affect the aggregate demand increase, and also the output will be increased. So the second one is contractionary. It used during period of economic boom or high inflation. It involves decreasing government spending and increasing taxes to reduce aggregate demand. So it means that by the government spending decrease and the taxes will be increased, it will affect the aggregate demand will be decreased, and also the output will be decreased. So next, I'm going to explain about the graph for the expansionary. For the expansionary, it shows the effect of expansionary fiscal policy during the economic downturn and high unemployment. P0 and Y0, as you can see, is the initial equilibrium level in the economy. When government implement expansionary, which is the government spending will be increased and the tax will be lower, so the aggregate demand will be increased. When there is an increase in the aggregate demand, which is AD0 to AD1, the level of output increase from Y0 to YGTP, or the Y1. So next, I'm gonna explain about the graph for the contractionary. As we can see, the figure shows the effect of a contractionary monetary policy during inflation. P0 and Y0 is the initial equilibrium level in the economy. When the government implement contract, which is lower government spending and raise taxes, then the aggregate demand will fall. When aggregate demand will fall, which is the AD0 to AD1, the level of output falls from Y0 to YGTP or Y1. So the same goes for the price level. Okay, now I'm going to explain about the crowding out effect curve. As we can see, the diagram shows how crowding out effect happens. P1 and Y1 is the initial equilibrium level in the economy. Expansionary fiscal policy shift the AD curve from AD1 to AD2. The level of output increased from Y1 to Y2. This shows zero crowding out effect. In the event of incomplete crowding out effect, AD will only turn into AD2 because of the initial increase in AD compensated by the fall in consumption or investment. So there is only a small change in output from Y1 to Y2. In the event of a complete crowding out effect, the initial increase in aggregate demand will fully compensated with fall in consumption and also investment, and the aggregate demand back to normal, and the output, which is Y, is unchanged. I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Zulfikar bin Hawari. My metric number 3008C4. Today I want to explain about monetary policy. Monetary policy is an economic policy that manages the size and growth rate of the money supply in the economy. It is a powerful tool to regulate macroeconomic variables such as inflation and employment. Objective of monetary policy have three. First, inflation. Second, unemployment. And third, currency exchange rate. Okay, now I will explain about monetary policy tools. Monetary policy tools have divided by two. First, expansionary. Second, contractionary. Okay, expansionary is to increase the money supply in the economy by decreasing interest rate, purchasing government security by central bank, and lowering the reserve requirement for bank. Okay, I want to explain about the figure of expansionary monetary policy. The figure show the effect of expansionary monetary policy during the economic downturn and high employment. When P0 and Y0 is the equilibrium level in the economy, AD0 intersect with SA0 and LAS0. When CB implement expansionary MP by bond in the OMO, lower RR, lower DR. MS will increase, R will fall, I will rise, and AD will increase. When there is an increase in AD0 to AD1, the level of output increase from Y0 to YGDP. The same goes for price level. Okay, second, I will explain about the contractionary. Contractionary is to decrease the money supply in the economy. It can be achieved by raised interest rate, selling government bonds, and increase the reserve requirement for bank. Okay, I want to explain about the figure of contractionary monetary policy. Figures show the effect of a contractionary monetary policy during inflation. When P0 and Y0 is the equilibrium level in economy, AD0 is the equilibrium level in the economy SA0 and LAS0. When CB implement contractionary MP, sell bond in the OMO, raise RR, raise DR. MF will fall, R will rise, I will fall, AD fall. When AD decrease, AD0 to AD1, the level of output falls from Y0 to YGDP. The same goes for the price level.